any day now, we could see the Texans hire a new offensive coordinator. They've been taking their time interviewing 5 potential candidates, and today we'll break down who will be the Texans offensive coordinator probably by the end of the week. They fired the offense coordinator already, Bobby Slowick, a couple weeks ago. They've been in the interview process. They're looking for their right guy in terms of how they can change this offense. Last year, the Texans had a very bad offense. It wasn't very bad, but the offensive line did not play a good factor. It was a very underwhelming season for what the Texans had at the firepower on offense. So hopefully they can restack this year. But let's jump into this week's video. Today, 5 potential candidates. Jerrod Johnson, the current quarterback coach, Syracuse's offensive coordinator, Jeff Mixon, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback coach, Thad Lewis, as well as Nick Caley, the tight end coordinator, passing game coordinator for the Rams. And they just interviewed Brian Johnson, who I do not personally want, just because of the Eagles season last year. And honestly, let's get to the first candidate that I could see the Texans hiring. And I'll talk about who I think they're going to hire, and it makes the most sense to hire who I'm talking about. But let's kind of compare and contrast the Eagles season from last year. Hopefully you can see this. But looking at this is 2023. 25 points a game, 433 total points. They had, and if you just compare the 2 seasons, they had 2 more points a game, just like 20 points off the total points, 30 points off. They had more first downs than they did in 2023. They had more pass yards. So honestly, for as bad as it looked statistically for the Eagles offense, they actually had a pretty good season. And the whole problem of why the Eagles fired Brian Johnson was pretty much the fact that we already saw that offense self-destruct. And looking at the Eagles and what they were able to do in 2023, they had a great first half of the season. But the biggest problem to why Brian Johnson got fired was the eruption in the playoffs. They went on a big losing streak, barely snuck into the wild card, and got blown up by the Bucs in the first round. So it was a tough spot to be in. They did win 11 games. It's just a question of, do you want to bring in Brian Johnson for this job? That is a pretty big thing to do. So it's a tough ask, and honestly, I really do believe it will be Jerrod Johnson, the current quarterback coach of the Houston Texans. And when you look at what the Texans have to do with this offense, Johnson, he's already there, so you have him as the current quarterback coach. I love the fact that the Texans are interviewing a lot of people, but you have to hire the right guy, and you can't just bring in some guy. I would love to bring in somebody from Sean McVay's tree. It definitely isn't the worst idea to go out and get a guy like Nick Caley. But like, the point I'm trying to make here is Jerrod Johnson is the perfect candidate for the Texans to hire. And I say this because you look at what he's been able to do this season. He's close with Stroud. You're going in your offensive tree, considering he was the quarterback coach. The Jets drew interest in him. I talked about it a couple weeks ago, how we could lose Jerrod Johnson. Then we fired Bobby Slowick. I was very kind of caught off guard that Bobby Slowick was out after 2 years, because you would think you would keep your offensive coordinator, try and say, hey, our offensive line was the problem. No, they kind of put the blame on Bobby Slowick, and I agree that he should have been fired. Some people say, hey, give him some time. The offensive line was bad. CJ Stroud had a down year. But the way I look at the way the Texans offense played last year in terms of the 2024 season, it was a disappointment. Yes, they won in the wild card. Their defense bailed them out. Yes, they played well in the divisional round. And the Texans could have gone on a run if they offensive line could have went their way. But not only that, the biggest problem with the Texans was the fact that they couldn't execute in the big game. And they would have these games where they had good games against good teams like the Bills in the regular season, and you would lose to a team like the Jets. And that's not good. You can't have inconsistent offensive play, and I like Bobby Slowick's style. It definitely wasn't the worst, especially for what he did in Stroud's rookie season. He was able to have a lot more developing pass plays. The offensive line held up on their end. with no Joe Mixon, you didn't rely heavily on the run. So this year, I think they relied too much on the run, and when the run game didn't get going, you continued to run it. And you have to have some common ground to where it's like, okay, the run game's not working, we can do some play action, hit Cade Stover over the middle, Nico Collins, and that's another thing where you have to kind of distribute your cap space. So looking at everybody here, Gerard Johnson makes the perfect sense to be the next offensive coordinator. Qualified, local guy, and he's qualified. So looking at what the Texans need to do now is hire Gerard Johnson and figure out the contract with Stephon Diggs. It looks like he's going to come back after the Super Bowl is when things are going to start heating up in terms of trade rumors, T. Higgins signings, and what the Texans need to do. Because right now they need an offensive coordinator. That should be happening within the next week or two. You have a lot of candidates to choose from. And I would be shocked if it was anybody other than Gerard Johnson, just because he's in the coaching tree and it makes the most sense. However, with that being said, the Texans could pull a surprising move and go get Nick Callie, and I would be like, okay, I don't hate it. What can he do? What can he bring to the table? So it's a tough spot for the Texans to be in because you don't want to make the wrong decision. And I think going with the most simple thing, it might sound little cliche and be like, all right, let's just go with the casual guy. Obviously, you want to have the big hiring. You want to have the go get the Chip Kelly. And I would love to go get Chip Kelly, but he's decided he's going to stay. So that's tough. But now you look at everybody else for the strong candidates that they are. Nick Callie, strongest external candidate so far, he isn't getting the Tampa job. So it's probably between Callie and you look at, I would say, Gerard Johnson and Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson just got interviewed yesterday, but it's a matter of what does the Texans' identity want to be on offense? And if the team stays the way it is right now and you don't get a T. Higgins, you don't get an Ibuka in the draft, can you operate with this offense? And I think yes, but you obviously want to expand off of that. There's a lot of offensive line you can get in free agency. There's a lot of receiver talent you can get in the draft, and even Tez Johnson could be in a potential second round, who's probably on the same caliber as Emeka Ibuka. So as much as I'd love to get Ibuka, I've talked about this in a past video, that's Stroud's teammate right there back in college, so it would be great chemistry. However, you have to find the right fit on offense first. Bobby Slowick wasn't the worst option, but definitely need to look into another option because last year was tough. You're running it as much as you are. You have to involve C.J. Stroud. There is too many times, especially in the Charger game, hey, let's run it. And late in games, we decided to throw it and the picks because the offensive. Here's the thing. C.J. Stroud looked so bad last year because the long developing plays that Bobby Slowick ran, Stroud had nobody open, so he had no choice but to throw it away. And when he had to throw it away, he got hit as he threw, and it was in the double coverage. So I'm not going to put a lot of blame on Stroud. Yes, he didn't play great, but the system that Slowick ran, it was long developing routes, and when they worked, sometimes they worked. But when it didn't work, you could see it was like, what is Stroud doing? So I don't want to have to blame the offense because as a quarterback, and I love how Stroud has been able to keep his composure, but the biggest thing right now is getting Gerard Johnson and going from there. We have a lot to talk about this offseason in terms of wide receiver help, offensive line help, and potential safety help because Eric Murray should re-sign. He's a good depth piece, but then you have Jalen Pitre coming back off injury. Kalen Bullock, who could probably play in the slot corner. He could also play safety. Jimmy Ward, you're probably going to have to figure out where to put him if you bring him back. And there's just a lot of things the Texans have to do, and it all starts with figuring out your offense and what do you want to do. And there's a pass first, run first. There's so many things you could do. And if you get a T. Higgins, if you get a Garrett Wilson, if you get a DK Metcalf or a George Pickens, that will help you highly. Tank Dell is very injured. And Stephon Diggs, who there's an argument he may never be the same player after a torn ACL and being 31 years old. I don't mind bringing him back as a veteran piece for $13 million a year because that's kind of what he's worth. But in general, Texans have a lot of work to do, and this has been kind of the recap of who are they going to hire. And it's down to 5 final guys. My personal decision, I believe it's going to be Gerard Johnson, the quarterback coach. And it could be Callie, it could be Brian Johnson, but it's going to be a tough race. I believe the Texans will hire somebody within the next week or two, but all this kind of just goes to the next step. Who do you hire? And then who do you go out and get? Because you know Nick Caserio is going to make some moves this offseason. And man, am I looking forward to potentially. And here's the thing. You talk up every offseason and you're probably like, is T. Higgins actually going to come to Houston? The big thing is probably never going to happen. But you would have to expect Caserio to restructure some contracts, maybe trade some players around. You never know. So we're going to talk about a lot of potential trade rumors in future videos, as well as players that are on the team that you wouldn't necessarily expect because of the big cap number. But anyway, appreciate everyone watching. Let me know who do you think is going to be hired for the Texans, as well as who do you go and get out? Who do you go out and get in the offseason, especially at wide receiver? You need a lot of wide receiver help. But thank you everyone so much for watching. Please give me your feedback in the comments, and we'll catch you in the next video.